I am 32 years old, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, the kind with thin walls and a kitchen light that hums if you leave it on too long. I work remotely for a mid-sized design firm, which means most days I barely leave the apartment, and most nights end the same way, quiet, awake, and thinking about something that never really finished. This story does not end the way it should have, and even now I am careful about how close I let myself get to the details. It is almost midnight as I think about this, sitting at my small dining table with my laptop closed and my phone face down, like it might interrupt me if I am not careful. I have not told this story out loud before. Not because it is dramatic or shocking, but because saying it makes it real in a way I have managed to avoid. Writing feels safer. Like I can pause if it starts to feel too heavy. Right now, my life looks stable from the outside. I pay my rent on time. I cook most of my meals. I have friends I see on weekends and a job that keeps me busy enough. Nothing is obviously missing. That might be the hardest part to explain. Loss does not always leave a visible gap. Sometimes it just settles into the routine and becomes part of it. I used to believe that if something mattered enough, it would force its way to the surface. That it would demand to be acknowledged. What I learned instead is that important things can stay quiet for a long time, especially when both people are good at pretending they are fine. There are nights when I replay small moments without meaning to. Not the big ones, but the ordinary ones. A shared look that lingered half a second too long. A message I read but did not answer right away. A choice that felt practical at the time and harmless enough to delay. I am not telling this because I expect anything from it. I am telling it because some stories do not fade on their own. They wait. And this one has been waiting longer than I want to admit. I met her during my second year at the firm, back when we still worked out of a shared office downtown. Her name was Claire. She was a year younger than me, recently moved from Sacramento, and still adjusting to Portland in that cautious way people do when they are not sure they plan to stay. She lived with a roommate she barely mentioned and biked to work every day, even when it rained. Especially when it rained. She was not loud or immediately noticeable. She had a habit of arriving a few minutes early and sitting at her desk without turning on her computer right away, just staring at the screen like she was gathering herself. When she spoke in meetings, she kept her voice even and her sentences short, as if she did not want to take up more space than necessary. She listened more than she talked. When she did talk, it was usually to ask a question no one else had thought to ask. The first time I really noticed her was over something small. We were standing near the coffee machine, waiting for it to finish, and she apologized for no reason at all. Not for bumping into me or interrupting me, just a quiet, sorry, as she stepped aside. She smiled when she said it, but it was a careful smile, practiced, like she had learned it a long time ago. I remember thinking that she apologized the way some people breathe, automatically. Over time, I noticed other things. She chewed on the inside of her cheek when she was thinking. She forgot her lunch more often than she remembered it. She kept a stack of sticky notes on her desk, each one filled front and back, even though she could have just used her phone. There was nothing about her that felt overwhelming or urgent. Just a steady presence that slowly became familiar, then necessary, before I realized I was paying attention at all. Closeness did not arrive all at once. It settled in quietly, the way habits do, without asking permission. It started with convenience. Our desks were near each other, and it made sense to walk to the same coffee place in the mornings. We did not plan it at first. One of us would stand up, grab a jacket, and the other would follow without comment. The barista learned our orders before we ever learned each other's last names. We talked in pieces. Small updates about projects, complaints about the printer, observations about the weather that were more about mood than temperature. Some days we barely spoke at all, just sat in the same space, typing, occasionally glancing up to see if the other was still there. I learned the sound of her keyboard, lighter than mine, quicker. She learned when to interrupt me and when not to. Lunch became another routine. We did not always eat together, but when we did, it was usually at our desks, containers open, screens pushed back just enough to face each other. We shared food without making it a thing. I would slide something across to her. She would nod and take it. Sometimes we ate in silence, and it never felt uncomfortable. Silence, with her, felt like rest. Outside of work, our lives touched in small, unremarkable ways. We started texting about shows we were both half watching. A link here, a screenshot there. Nothing that required an immediate response. There were nights when one of us would type a message and then delete it, and somehow the conversation would still continue the next day, uninterrupted. I noticed when she was having a harder week, even if she did not say it. She moved more slowly. Her jokes fell flatter. She stayed later than usual, staring at her screen long after the office had emptied. On those days, I would linger too, pretending I was still busy. We did not talk about what was wrong. We just existed in the same room, the quiet doing most of the work. She started to rely on me for small things. Asking if an email sounded okay before she sent it. Wondering out loud if she was overthinking something. I never told her she was not. I just listened. At some point, I realized she was the first person I wanted to tell when something good or frustrating happened during the day. I did not examine that realization too closely. It felt harmless, almost practical. There was no moment I could point to and say, this is when it changed. It was more like waking up one day and realizing a piece of your routine has become non-negotiable. She was there when my morning started and still there when my evenings ran late. Her presence did not feel like excitement. It felt like alignment. Looking back, what stands out is not the conversations we had, but the ones we did not need to have. We understood each other in a way that felt earned, built from repetition and attention rather than confession. Somewhere in all of that ordinary time, something took shape, quietly, patiently, as if it assumed it would be given space to continue. The first signs were easy to dismiss because they did not announce themselves as problems. They showed up as pauses, as things we both seemed to step around without naming. I noticed how careful I was becoming with my words, how often I edited myself before speaking. Not because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, but because I was afraid of saying the right one too clearly. Claire had plans that extended beyond the office, beyond Portland even. She talked about them casually, usually at the end of the day, as we were packing up. Graduate programs she had bookmarked but not applied to. Cities she mentioned the way people mention places they have already decided on. She never asked what I thought about them. I never offered an opinion. We both acted as if those conversations were about something abstract, not time. I was not unaware of what was happening. That was the part that made it uncomfortable. I could feel the shape of the thing we were avoiding. It was there in the way I hesitated before making plans too far ahead, in the way I avoided using language that implied permanence. I told myself it was maturity. That letting things stay undefined was respectful. I told myself a lot of things that allowed me to keep the rhythm exactly as it was. There were moments when she seemed to pull back, just slightly. She would take longer to respond to messages. She would leave the office before I did, even when she had nothing urgent to get to. When I asked how she was doing, she answered honestly, but briefly, like she was conserving something. I noticed, and then I let the noticing end there. Once, after a long day, she lingered by my desk, her bag already over her shoulder. She looked like she wanted to say something, and I felt it, the opening of that moment. Instead of meeting it, I asked if she needed anything before heading out. She smiled, shook her head, and left. I stayed seated long after, replaying the way I had chosen the safest sentence available. I told myself that if something needed to be said, it would surface on its own. That forcing clarity would only complicate things. I believed that preserving what we had was the same as protecting it. Deep down, though, there was a quiet understanding that what we were protecting it from was the future. The fragility was not loud. It lived in restraint, in the careful maintenance of something that required momentum to survive. I could feel it when the room went quiet, when the silence felt heavier than usual. I chose comfort over risk, familiarity over truth, and each choice felt small enough to justify. Still, there was an unease that followed me home, a sense that we were standing on something that did not extend as far as we pretended it did. The decision happened on a Thursday evening, ordinary enough that it almost slipped past me. We had both stayed late, the office mostly empty, lights dimmed automatically row by row. Claire stood by my desk, her jacket folded over her arm, telling me she had finally applied to a program in Chicago. She said it lightly, like she was talking about a class she might take or a trip she was considering. I congratulated her without hesitation. It felt like the correct response. She did not say when she would hear back. I did not ask. There was a space after my words where something else could have fit. An acknowledgement, maybe. A question. Instead, I filled it with logistics. Asked if she needed help wrapping things up before she left. She smiled, thanked me, and said she was all set. After she left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at my screen without seeing it. I told myself that she deserved support, not pressure. That bringing up how I felt would complicate something she was already uncertain about. I told myself that timing mattered, and this was not the right moment. It all sounded responsible, measured, adult. On the walk home, my phone buzzed. A message from her, short and careful. She said she hoped telling me had not made things awkward. I stopped on the sidewalk to read it again. My first instinct was to type something honest. Something that acknowledged what her leaving might mean to me. I wrote it out, slowly, then deleted it. The words felt too heavy to hand over so casually. I replied that it was not awkward at all. That I was excited for her. That she would do great, wherever she ended up. I added a smiley face, then removed it. Settled on a period instead. Standing there, with traffic passing and my phone glowing in my hand, I understood exactly what I was choosing. I was choosing not to ask her to stay, not to tell her that her absence would matter, not to risk shifting the shape of what we had. It felt like restraint. Like respect. Like giving her space to move forward without burden. I pressed send. I found out on a Monday morning, the kind that starts without urgency and then never quite recovers. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from our manager, asking if I had a moment to talk later in the day. There was no context. I assumed it was about a project. We spoke just after lunch, his voice careful in the way people use when they are delivering information rather than news. He told me Claire had accepted the offer. He said Chicago again, as if repeating the city made it clearer. He mentioned her last day, already circled on the calendar. 2 weeks. He asked if I could help transition her workload. I said yes without thinking. I did not feel anything right away. I finished the call, closed my laptop, and sat there, hands folded, waiting for a reaction that did not arrive. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and off. I remember noticing that I had left the coffee untouched long enough for it to go cold. Later that afternoon, Claire texted me herself. She apologized for not telling me sooner. Said she wanted to be sure before saying anything. Said she hoped I understood. I read the message a few times before replying. My response was polite, supportive, exactly what I had practiced being. I told her I was happy for her. I told her she would be missed. I did not say by whom. The days after that moved strangely. Work continued. Meetings happened. Files were shared and archived. Claire began packing up her desk in small stages, taking home a plant one day, a stack of books the next. We talked, but only about practical things. Deadlines. Contacts. The weather. There was a distance in her now that I recognized too late, a carefulness that matched my own. On her last day, we stood near the elevator, waiting. The building smelled faintly of cleaning solution. She hugged me, briefly, the way coworkers do. She said we should keep in touch. I said we should. Neither of us followed up on how. It was weeks later, not in the moment itself, that the weight of it settled in. It happened quietly, one evening, when I reached for my phone to tell her something small and realized there was no longer a reason to. The absence was not sharp. It was dull, persistent. I began to understand that what I had lost was not her presence, exactly, but the possibility I had chosen not to name. That realization stayed with me, long after everything else had resumed its place. It has been 3 years since Claire left, and my life has continued in ways that look reasonable on paper. I am still in Portland. I moved apartments once, traded one set of quiet streets for another. I still work for the same firm, though the faces have changed enough that her absence no longer feels noticeable to anyone but me. Days fill themselves easily if you let them. That part is not difficult. What remains is smaller than I expected. There is no dramatic reminder, no box of letters or forgotten photos. It is one habit, barely visible, that I have never corrected. Every morning, before work, I stop at the same coffee place we used to go to. Not because the coffee is better than anywhere else, but because my body still moves there without asking. I order the same thing I always did. I stand in the same spot while I wait. Sometimes I catch myself listening for a bike bell behind me, even though I know it will not be there. I tell myself I am just distracted. That it means nothing. The barista no longer recognizes me, which feels appropriate somehow. Time has done its job with everything except that pause, that half-second where I still expect the day to unfold the way it once did. I do not think about Claire constantly. That would be easier to explain. She shows up instead in small, uninvited ways. When I hesitate before sending a message. When I choose the safer option without fully examining why. When a conversation drifts close to something honest and I let it pass. These are not dramatic moments. They barely register unless I am paying attention. Occasionally, I imagine what I would say if I ran into her now. I never get very far. The words feel unnecessary this late, like subtitles added long after the scene has ended. Whatever mattered most was decided quietly, without witnesses, and carried out exactly as planned. I finish my coffee, throw the cup away, and walk to work, aware that the only thing still holding her place in my life is the fact that I never asked her to stay.